There comes a time when you need to draw a line, take a stand. You have to establish yourself. And with the news going on right now across the United States, I've decided this is where I'm going to make mine. I've been following the news regarding policing and law enforcement, all kinds of things of that nature, for years now. And I have seen the ups, I've seen the downs, I've seen the good instances, and I've seen the ones that have resulted in riots across the entire nation. And these subjects have been discussed to death. They really have. And there's not a whole lot that I can personally add to any one of them. And I'm not going to try either. No. This video is about the social contract. And I don't know if it's something a lot of people have heard of. It doesn't seem to me like something a lot of people are aware of. Or if they are, it's only in a tangential way. So I want to do my best to break that down into something that people can more easily digest, so that we can use this as yet another lens to view society. Now, up front, this video is going to be drastically and woefully inadequate. And I say this up front because the subject that I'm going to start off with is going to be greatly reduced in its scope. Every single instance that I'm going to talk about has had hours of footage done on it. It's been analyzed and introspected and all of that more than I could do in a year. So keep in mind that you may disagree with what I say, but that's because it's lacking any and all nuance. The second part of this is going to be a very deep dive. Well, that's the point. It's not a very deep dive. It's going to be skimming across a very deep subject, which is the social contract. And the social contract itself has been discussed by people far smarter than I am, who have put a lot more time and energy into it, specifically Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These are philosophical theorists from back in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, who basically laid the foundation for our entire society. Now, they have written entire works on this. I cannot cover that in one video. I could make an entire series of videos out of it, but that has also been done. If you're interested in that, I can point you in the right directions. So, now that I've said that, let's get on with it. And the first thing I want to cover is the police. Specifically, I want to cover several of the incidents that have happened over the last several years that have resulted in mass protest, mass violence, mass destruction. So I'm going to start back in 2016, and I'm going to say Michael Brown. Michael Brown was a black man. Police were called on him because he shoplifted. During the encounter, he assaulted an officer, attempted to take his firearm, and during the entire thing, he was shot. That is the long and short of it. There are nuances to it, there's more details, but again, like I said, I'm not doing a deep dive on this, I am going to go way shallow on it. Brianna Taylor. She was an associate of a man named Jamarcus Glover, who was a known drug dealer. Now, because she was an associate of him, when police were going after drugs, they did a raid on her apartment. Because, well, she was an associate, and that meant that she might have been involved somehow. I'm not them, I don't know all the facts of it, but I do know that that was their reasoning for going in. During the raid, the man that she was with, Kenneth Walker, shot at the police. They shot back. During the exchange, she was shot and killed. Then there's George Floyd, whom everybody in the world knows about. Police were called on him because he passed a counterfeit note. When they tried to arrest him, he resisted arrest for a long time, actually. And even during the court case that just wrapped up recently, we still cannot establish the actual cause of death, So I'm just going to say that he died from many complications during his resistance of arrest. After that, we had Rayshard Brooks. That was a domestic complaint. He was sleeping in either a drive-thru or a parking lot. Basically, he was loitering, and the business wanted him to go. When the officers got there, they did a sobriety test. They decided that he had been driving under the influence. When they went to arrest him and take him in, he resisted arrest, assaulted the officers, stole their taser, fired the taser, and during his assault on the officers and attempting to flee, he was shot and killed. We had Jacob Blake. Police were called for a domestic incident that was not an incident. He was breaking a restraining order, he had assaulted people, he had stolen property, and he was already wanted for sexual assault, trespassing, and domestic abuse. When the police got there, they did everything they could to de-escalate the situation and arrest him peacefully, going so far as to allow him to both possess a knife and attempt to retrieve a knife, following him around his own vehicle, and only when he tried to get into the vehicle and produce a weapon was he shot. And he lived. Recently, we had Dante White. He was stopped in traffic for having expired tags and registration. He was also wanted on a warrant for fleeing officers and illegal possession of firearms. While he seemed cooperative at first, he then decided to, when he felt he had an opening, resist arrest, tried to flee, and he was shot and killed. Then we have the case of Adam Toledo. At like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, I think it was like a 12 or 13-year-old kid, was out and about. Police got a call for shots fired. When they got to the location where they believed the shots were from, they found him and another adult. As soon as the police were spotted, they fled. And as Toledo was trying to dispose of the firearm, he was shot. And then we have the case that is only a few days old of Micaiah Bryant. Police were called to a domestic assault where she was already in the process of trying to stab somebody, and the police shot her while she was trying to stab them. All of those have had massive, massive protests, and they have been destructive. Every single one of them. But there's a couple of other cases that I want to get to, and that is Philando Castile. Philando Castile was pulled over in a traffic stop. It was a false positive for a robbery suspect. Another store or something like that had been robbed. They were looking for the vehicle, they were looking for the occupants. They stopped the wrong vehicle. Now, Philando Castile was a concealed carry permitted firearms owner who was carrying a firearm. He informed the police officer that he was carrying a firearm. The police officer had told him that he needed his identification, and when Philando Castile reached back for his ID, he was shot. There's also the controversial case of Tamir Rice. Police were called for, I believe it was a minor in possession of a firearm. The kid had an airsoft replica gun. Now, I believe it was the case that they're supposed to have a tip on them, and that tip had either been painted or removed, but either way, when the police saw the kid with the airsoft gun, they shot him. Now, I bring up all of these cases because these are all what people are claiming to be a violation of the social contract. And so I want to keep those in mind as we move on. So this is the social contract. I'm going to start off with the definition, and then we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty. Very little of the nitty-gritty, as I said. There has been hundreds, if not thousands, of pages written on this, and I'm trying to condense it into a couple of paragraphs. Bear with me. It's been a trip. So, the Oxford definition for the social contract. It says an implicit agreement among members of society to cooperate for social benefits. For example, by sacrificing some individual freedom for state protection. Theories of the social contract become popular in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries among theorists such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau as a means of explaining the origin of government and the obligations of subjects. To put it very simply, once we decided that we were going to coalesce into groups and we were going to work together, we agreed that for the good of everyone, we're all going to give a little bit. And we know this from everywhere in our lives. Every relationship that we have, it's supposed to be give and take. We give a little bit, we take a little bit. And someone else will give a little bit, and we'll take a little bit. This is just kind of standard. This is how relationships work. And I'm going to tie a lot of this back to my other videos, so just bear with me. So, starting off with Hobbes, since Hobbes kind of started the whole ball rolling on this. So Hobbes described the social contract as the condition in which people give up some individual liberty in exchange for some common security. He pointed out that in the state of nature, everyone has the right of everything. There are no limits on the right of natural liberty. Basically, think about a world with no society at all. No society, no governments, no civilization, no nothing. It's just all of us out in nature with rocks and sticks. So what's yours and what's not? Well, the answer is very simple. Might makes right. So if you have a rock and you can use it to bludgeon people over the head better than they can bludgeon you over the head, then whatever they have is yours. All you have to do is go and take it. That's very simply the rule of natural liberty. I mean, nobody complains that there are not bear police officers to guard bunnies from being eaten by foxes. No, that's not how nature works. Nature is you have the right to whatever you can take. Society, on the other hand, does not operate that way. We have decided that your stuff is your stuff, and you should not have to worry about people taking your stuff. You should not have to worry about people killing you either. In general, you should not have to fear other people. And this became the foundation of basic civil rights. The idea that in order to create a society, to properly cooperate with each other, we're going to agree that I'm not going to take your stuff, you're not going to take my stuff. I'm not going to harm you, you're not going to harm me. I'm giving up my claim to everything in the world in exchange for everybody else giving up their claim on what's mine. This was the foundation of property rights, individual rights. It was the foundation of pretty much everything we live for today. Without this, you could have a house, but the first person to come in with a gun and say, "Get out, this house is mine now," well, that would be their house then. So that was Hobbes, and Hobbes was very revolutionary for his time, and very relevant now. There was, of course, room to build on that. And so we get into Locke. Now, I have a quote here from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that I just want to read verbatim. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states, "In the two treatises of government, he defended the claim that all men are by nature free and equal against claims that God had made all people naturally subject to a monarch. He argued that people have rights, such as the right to life, liberty, and property, that have the foundation independent of the laws of any particular society. Locke used the claim that men are naturally free and equal as part of the justification for understanding legitimate political government as the result of a social contract where people in the state of nature conditionally transfer some of their rights to the government in order to better ensure the stable, comfortable enjoyment of their lives, liberty, and property. Since governments exist by the consent of the people in order to protect the rights of the people and promote the public good, governments that fail to do so can be resisted and replaced with new governments. Locke is thus also important for his defense of the right of revolution. Locke also defends the principle of majority rule and the separation of legislative and executive powers. In the letter concerning toleration, I can speak. Locke denied that coercion should be used to bring people to what the ruler believes is the true religion, and also denied that churches should have any coercive power over their members. Locke elaborated on these themes later in his political writings, such as the second letter on toleration and third letter on toleration. Notice a trend there? He liked his letters of toleration. So there's a lot there. That was very dense. There's a lot to go through. But we're going to take it point for point as best I can. The first was, all people are equal, no man is born inferior to a monarch or tyrant. And that's pretty self-explanatory. the idea is that in nature, we are all equal. The idea that you would naturally be inferior would be like saying that a bear must be subservient to a bunny because the bunny is divine. Nature doesn't care, the bunny's getting eaten. So too is it true for us. We are all equal. We can try to order ourselves into a hierarchy, but we are all equal. We all bleed the same, as they say. The second part of that was that all people have the right to life, liberty, and property. Now, you might have heard that somewhere before. I think they called it the Declaration of Independence. Possibly the Federalist Papers, I'm not sure. There's a lot of things like that. We said the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but property is kind of interchangeable there and sometimes just added to it. Basically, you have the right to your life. You have the right to not have people take your life away. You have the right to your freedom, or rather, you have the right to not have your freedom taken from you, and the same thing goes for your property. They're called negative rights usually. It's not necessarily the right of what you can do, it's more the right of people not to do to you. Pretty simple concept, but a very important one. But here's another one that's also very important, and one that a lot of people, I think, either don't understand or tacitly misunderstand. And this is also a point that I covered in law, and I will reiterate later on. Government exists at the consent of the people. People give up some natural rights in trusting government to protect their social rights. So, government exists at the consent of the people. Basically, we have a government. Every country has a government. I'm sure most people have also heard of revolutions, when the people say, we've had enough of the government, we no longer obey the laws, we no longer respect your right to rule, we're done. So, the government exists and truly can only exist at the consent of the people. Now, that isn't to say that a government cannot try to force themselves into power by suppressing a population, but that's an entirely different subject that I'm saving for a different video. No, the government exists at the consent of the people, which is to say that the government both exists because the people want it to, and it should reflect the people that consensually have it. It also means that people give up some rights in trusting the government to protect social rights. So, it's not enough that we have the right to be free from people taking our lives, our liberty, and our property. But as a society, and as having a government, we trust that this right that we have, the right to life, liberty, and property, will be protected by that government. It's not enough that we say, I'm not going to take from you and you're not going to take from me. We say, government, not only am I not going to take from them and them not from me, but if they try to, you stop them. That's your job. We entrust this to you. You exist at our consent and our pleasure. You stop people from harming me. And most importantly is, of course, the right to revolution. The right to replace that government should it fail. And this is a right that everyone has. I mean, if the government no longer functions, it's your job to tear it down. And in that same sentence, I want to jump ahead a little bit. See, Locke put in here the idea that should the government fail, you have the right to replace that government. And I don't think anyone really disagrees with that. But I want to jump forward a while to President Ulysses S. Grant. Now, President Ulysses S. Grant was General Ulysses S. Grant during the American Civil War. Now, the American Civil War, which is also that's a thing to get into. But it involved half of the United States essentially breaking away, saying we no longer respect your authority, we no longer see you as a legitimate power, we are going to be independent of you. And of course we then fought a war over that. Afterwards, after Grant had become president, and after he had gone through and done his best to reunify the country, he said something. He made this statement when he was asked about whether what the Confederacy did was right or not. He said, "The right of revolution is an inherent one. When people are oppressed by their government, It is a natural right they enjoy to relieve themselves of oppression, if they are strong enough, whether by withdrawal from it or by overthrowing it and substituting a government more acceptable. Sounds very Lockean to me, if you ask. Very importantly, though, however, is what he followed that up with, and I don't have that copied in the quote because it's not terribly important to it, but it is very important to everything else. He followed up that quote by saying, essentially, if you win, you've substituted the government and you've made it more acceptable. However, if you lose, you will be subject to the whims of your victors, which means that once you have given up on the social contract, once you have decided that you're going to use every tool given to you by natural law to take what you believe is yours, well, then the social contract is out in both directions. Not only have you broken the social contract and decided you're not going to obey them, being your opposing side, but they no longer have to respect your rights either. So too has this been the case in pretty much every single revolution in history. Look at every revolution in history that has ever failed, and almost every single one of them has been followed with mass executions. It's just the way things go. In that way, we had President Grant basically repeating Locke, just a long time after Locke had said it, with much greater context at the time. So, the right to revolution. If the government does not serve you, you have the right to turn on it. That does not mean you get the right to win. You're going to have to fight for it, but you have the right to try. And you will suffer the consequences of it should you fail. Now, after that, I want to move on to Rousseau. For here, I have a quote from Rousseau. And Rousseau says, quote, "Let us then admit that force does not create right, and that we are obliged to obey only legitimate powers," end quote. Essentially what this is saying is that we have a social contract. We have a social contract with each other, our neighbors, our communities, and our government. And that social contract is just that. It's a contract. It's an agreement between us that we give, we take, you give, you take. This should be equal. And that just because one side may have greater force does not give them any kind of additional rights, authority, or legitimacy. This is a case that we see in many countries as, they've developed. Many countries have armies. They have military might. They have a military might on far more of a scale than any given citizen, of course. But it's implicit in the social contract that your government is not going to turn that force on you. After all, it's your government. You are its citizen. You have an implicit social contract. And what do we see in every single nation that has gone through and done that? Every nation that has turned its army on its own people has been a fascist state of some kind, with absolutely no social contract. In those states, what the government says goes, and the other side gets nothing. The citizenry gets nothing. There is no social contract there. And pretty much every single one of those states has also failed because of that. Once you have no social contract, you pretty much have no social anything. You don't have a society. You have a government and you have slaves. That can keep going for a long time, but eventually it always ends. So Rousseau said that people are free and equal as they all forfeit the same rights and accept the same duties. So going back and building off of both Hobbes and Locke, it is to say that we give up a lot of our natural rights, the rights to everything, in exchange for these social rights that our property will be protected. It also agrees that our governments are bound by those same things. The government obeys the right not to take our stuff, and we also will not try and take the government stuff. So this is just saying that no matter what hierarchy you're on, whether you're citizen, whether you're noble, whether you're government, whatever you are, we all have the same equal rights and duties. This is implicit in the social contract. He also said, however, the right to choose those rights forfeited and the duties accepted are dictated by the majority. And that is basically what we have now. Rousseau was a firm believer in a multi-part government, having a legislative and an executive style branch. He called it the sovereign, but it was essentially the executive, as we would understand it. Maybe it's the judicial, and kind of hard to tell. Maybe it's both of them rolled into one. What that meant is that the majority, since the government is created out of the consent of the people, it would be then the majority of those people who would dictate essentially what rights are we going to forfeit, what duties will we accept to have the rights that we have remaining protected. And thus you have basic democracy. Now, whether you have direct democracy or representative democracy, either way you go, it still meant the same thing. The government protects our rights, and those rights are dictated by the majority of the people. It also meant that a government was restrained by the people to act on their behalf, and that people had the right to replace that government should it exceed those restraints. After all, we entrust the government to protect our rights. Should the government decide that it is going to violate those rights, then the government has broken the social contract and it should be done away with. And this is a very, very 17 billion mile overview of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau on the social contract. And I want to bring this back to what I started with, that being all the cases that we have had that have caused riots and everything between these people and police. In the modern world, in most first world nations anyway, second world nations too to some degree, most third world nations don't even have police. So this is primarily a first world problem. We have police. Now, with the social contract in mind, what are police? Police are people whom we have a contract with, who we have said, we are entrusting you to protect our rights. Because we are entrusting you to protect our rights, we are giving up some rights. That is to say, in order to facilitate your job in protecting my rights, I am giving you the ability to check my rights. Am I exceeding them in some way? Am I trespassing on somebody else's rights? When it comes to police, I do not have the ability to take my neighbor's things. However, a police officer, theoretically, on the suspicion that I may have, would have the right to come and say, I've gotten a report that you have taken something. Do you have the item? And if I do, he may say, I would like to take that right now. I'd like to hold it until we can figure out exactly who has possession of it. Now, does that sound like something that can be abused? Yes. Has it? Yes, of course. The system is not perfect. And that is something I may have to say several times in all of this. But I'm not talking about the system being perfect, I'm just trying to get across the general ideas. The same thing, of course, goes with the police having weapons. We say, I'm not going to kill, and you're not going to kill. However, what do we do with people who have broken the social contract? People whom say, I really don't care if you're not supposed to kill and I'm not supposed to kill. I'm going to. You have a couple of options. Either you can do the same, or you can let me kill you. Of course, now we have a third option. We could say, hey, police, there is somebody who has broken the social contract. They have broken the law. And I'll get to that in a minute, but law is the social contract. And so we entrust the police to come through and say, look, you have broken the social contract. You have two options. You can either cease breaking it, which is essentially just surrender and be arrested, or the police officer will not respect your social contract and will do what is needed to be done. In almost every single case that I listed off, the social contract was broken, and in the majority of them, it was broken by a person who was already breaking the social contract other people were enjoying. In the Michael Brown case, it was shoplifting. And we already have a social contract that says we have an economy and business model. I have goods, you have money. You give me money, you get goods. That is a social contract right there. Now, yes, we have laws, but the laws are just the incarnation of the social contract. So, When Michael Brown shoplifted, the contract was broken, the police came in. When the police came in, they said, look, you've already done wrong, please come with us. When he resisted, that was it. Brianna Taylor notably did not. However, she was associated with people who had. Now again, this is the system not being perfect. But Jamarcus Glover was a known drug dealer. We have agreed by the majority, or if it's not the majority, then the majority needs to speak up, that we are not going to have drugs in our society. He was a drug dealer. He broke the social contract. Now, she did not, that I know of. I've heard a lot of arguments going back and forth that there was a lot more to that story, but again, I'm not getting into that story, and I'm just going to say right now, for this purpose, she wasn't part of that. But simply by being associated with him, we say that, we're not going to do drugs. We should also not be associating with the people who are breaking the social contract. And so she was in the wrong place at the wrong time when they did come for him, and, well, she was shot. There's also the fact that the man that she was with, Kenneth Walker, when the police came in, shot at the police. Well, we have a social contract that says don't shoot at the police. He did. They shot back. In the case of George Floyd, counterfeiting. Now, I don't know all the details on the counterfeiting because, honestly, those details have gotten lost in everything else. But, taking it at the face value, if you passed a counterfeit 20, well, we have an agreement that we're going to use real money. We have a standard for money. That's part of our social contract. We all agree we're going to use this money, we're going to trade money for goods and services. By trying to break that, or by passing the counterfeit note, he broke that. And so, we ended up where we did. And then, when the police came in and tried to arrest him, he fought with them, he resisted them, and during the case, he lost his life. And I could go down the entire list, but I don't want to break it down point by point. Rayshard Brooks, domestic complaint, sleep in the parking lot and loitering. We've all agreed that, property, you're not allowed to stay there unless you have a reason to be there. Again, he resisted, he was shot. Jacob Blake broke multiple social contracts. He was wanted for assault, he was wanted for theft, all kinds of things. The Dante White thing, expired tags in the vehicle is what stopped him. Well, we have an agreement, part of the social contract, that we're all going to keep our vehicles maintained a certain way. Whether you agree that this was good or not, again, it is the majority that makes up the social contract, makes up the laws. If the majority didn't think that was the way it would be, then it wouldn't be, and if the majority now thinks that it shouldn't be, then it can be changed. Either way, though, as it stands, he was stopped for it, and then when they tried to arrest him for both the tags and a warrant, which basically said that you've already broken the social contract, and now we're going to take you in, well, he then tried to flee, he was shot and killed. The case of Adam Toledo, a minor out at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, with a gun, shooting at cars, allegedly. I don't know that there's actually been proof of that yet. Micaiah Bryant, trying to stab somebody to death with a knife. Both cases, the social contract has been broken. They're no longer respecting the social contract, and these are the consequences to it. Those are all the big cases right now that have caused riots and everything. I also want to get into the other two, Philando Castile and Tamir Rice. Now, Philando Castile, again, he was stopped on a false positive for a robbery suspect and then shot him when he went for his ID. Now, that is the social contract being broken in the other direction. We have a right that when we are dealing with the police, if we don't try to harm them, they're not supposed to harm us. And what happened? The officer wanted his ID. He tried to get his ID. That officer, for whatever reason, whether he was terrified or panicked or whatever, shot him. That officer broke the social contract, and that's why we say that he is guilty of it. The same thing goes for Tamir Rice, although that's a little bit more controversial, but I'm going to have to put my own opinion in this one. He was a kid. He had an airsoft rifle. Is it illegal? No. It's not even really questionable. Now, if he had a gun, that would be illegal. The fact that it was a replica, I can understand where the mistake was made. And I don't know enough about the case to make any judgment calls, but unless he was threatening somebody with it, I disagree with the way this went down. But these are all cases where the social contract was broken. In that last case, obviously the officers shot him. I don't think the officers needed to shoot him. And so, social contract broken in that way. So now that I've been able to bring that back to those cases, I wanted to tie back to my other videos, that being empathy, civility, and law, because these are all pillars of a society, and the social contract is yet another one. All of these pillars hold up a society, because if you take one of them away, you have weakened it, if not brought the entire thing down. So, the social construct and empathy. Now, I think that I've gotten through in all of this already the tenets of what empathy means in all of this. Empathy is kind of the basis for the social contract. According to natural law, you have a right to everything. Natural rights, you have the right to everything. Social rights, you do not. And that's very simple because it's kind of the golden rule. Okay? Do unto others. If you don't want your stuff taken, don't take someone else's stuff. Okay? Empathy, mutual respect and understanding. You don't want to be killed, don't kill other people. If they agree, great, we have a social contract. If you wouldn't want somebody to do it to you, you shouldn't do it to someone else. And if you don't want to do something to someone else, they shouldn't really want to do that to you. I mean, I don't want to harm people. I don't want them to harm me. I hope they don't want to harm me. Although I'm sure somebody out there probably would. Especially after this video. God, if this one doesn't get me taken offline, I don't know what will. So, the social contract and empathy, kind of inherent. They're both kind of wrapped together. As for the social contract and civility, without the social contract, there can only be violence. Again, without the social contract, we go back to natural law. And natural law is might makes right and survival of the fittest. Whatever you can take is yours. If you can't take it, it's not. And if you can't keep what's yours, it's not yours, even if you're in possession of it. You could be the weakest person sitting on the biggest pile of gold, but the first time somebody comes across and says, hey, I want that, they're going to take it. With civility, we say absolutely not. There are other ways to handle this besides violence. Would you like to use business, trade, bargaining, perhaps sharing? Let's go communism on this one. A piece of gold for everyone. There are other ways to solve these things besides violence. And if we all agree to be civil, well, that is a social contract. That is the social contract. We're observing it. We have put it into place. And so from there, I'm going to bring this all together and say the social contract and law. And I've already alluded to this several times, but this law is just the social contract in written form. I mean, I agree not to take your stuff, you agree not to take my stuff. Great. Social contract. It's the respect of property rights. Now, if I actually get out a piece of parchment and a quill and some ink, because that's how it was done back in the day, and I scribble on there that under penalty of law, no person shall take the property of another person without their due consent or compensation, or these will be the penalties. Now I have written a law. What has the law really done? Nothing. It's really done nothing, except put down on parchment where we can show it to other people and we can post it up on the giant refrigerator of justice. These are the laws that we abide by. I like that. Giant refrigerator of justice. Just one big old magnet in the law that says property rights. That's the kind of future I like. Giant refrigerators. But yeah, law. It's just the social contract put onto paper. And then we can show it to other people and say, hi, welcome to my society. This is how we operate, and I can show them all the laws that we have that dictate what our social contract is. And that's important because if you go around the world, you will notice that other countries have different social contracts. Sometimes they will call them customs. Sometimes they will call them laws. But either way, every country, every nation, every people are going to be different. What is acceptable here is not acceptable here. What is law here might be illegal here, might not be. There are going to be social constructs, legal constructs, religious contracts. Yeah, constructs. Contracts. I've been talking for like 45 minutes now. I'm entitled to make a couple of mistakes. Yeah, social contracts, religious contracts, governmental contracts, legal contracts, all these different contracts, and they change from place to place. Putting them down in law just means that we can show people that this is what we're doing, And it avoids so much trouble. Because now you can say, look, I'm going into this area. They followed these social contracts. And if I go in there, I am consenting that I'm going to abide by them. And if I don't, well, that's basically going back to the right of revolution. It's not really revolting against your own government, it's actually more of a war. But you're also saying that, I don't respect your social contract, I'm going to break it, and I'm going to try to overthrow it. And if I fail, well, please have mercy on me. Most people don't go that route. So yeah, that's the idea of the social contract. And I needed to make a video on this because I hear a lot of people talking about how police need to stop killing people. I'm not going to disagree with that one. I mean, police really should stop killing people. At the same time, however, if people didn't break the law, if people didn't assault each other, threaten each other, steal from each other, if people observe the social contract between each other, then the police would never be there to begin with. And I know that's the controversial opinion right now. Personal responsibility, but it's true. If you don't want to risk the social contract with the police, observe the social contract with other people. The most bizarre thing right now that I see is the fact that the police have been called for all of these things, all these people that have been doing things. One of the arguments that I keep getting back, and I keep seeing repeated in more places, is why did the police show up at all? Why not let the communities handle it themselves? Send a social worker, send a neighbor, send somebody else besides the police. And that's fine and all. I can't argue with that, but that's not the society that we have set up. We agreed, the majority agreed, a long time ago that we would have police. It started off with the town sheriff, who said, I'm going to be the enforcer of law around here. Usually they were elected by, the city at large. And as cities got bigger, they said, well, I need deputies. And then deputies became officers, and here we are. So we've already agreed to this, and that's just the way things are. Now, similarly, all these people that keep calling for the defunding, and let me make a distinction right here. Defunding the police does not exist, okay? Defunding the police is like saying, well, I'm pro-choice. No. You're trying to disguise what your actual intentions are with fruity language and deceptive wording. No. If you're pro-choice, you're pro-abortion. Everybody has a choice. Everybody's always had a choice. Even if you're pro-life, you have to acknowledge people still have a choice. You may not like that choice. You may want to criminalize that choice. But it's still there. No. If you're pro-choice, you're pro-abortion. Just come out and say it. We all know it's true anyway. Not the point. The point here is that defunding the police, flowery language, but what you're really saying is abolish the police. There is no defunding the police. If you defund them, then there are no more police. Okay? These people don't work for free. Simple? Yes? No? I hope it is. No. If you want to defund the police, you want to abolish the police. It's just instead of shooting them in the head, you're doing it, via bloodletting and just letting them slowly go. So, if your community decides that you want to get rid of the police, if the majority agree, there you go. That is the social contract at work. The government exists at the consent of the people, and the majority gets to dictate what the government does. Likewise, though, if you want to abolish the police, and, well, the majority says no, I think you see what we already have, which is riots in the streets, vandalism, burning, all of that. As far as I'm concerned, that is the right to revolution. And you're not going to convince me that it's not anything other than a revolution. Many of these people have already come out and stated plainly that their goal is revolution. They have a right to it. But as I will reiterate from Grant, if you fail in your revolution, you are subject to your victors. So either win or that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot after that. And that seems to be the route that a lot of the people have gone now. More power to them. I can't stop them. But we have a social contract, and they are breaking it. So now we only need to see what's going to come after that, because if they're not going to respect the social contract, then they cannot expect the social contract to be respected in their direction either. And I think that's one of the more tragic parts of this, because they think that it will be. They seem to think that they're right and they're just, and that their righteousness earns them some kind of special privilege of being respected, by being treated like they still have some kind of right to the social contract after violating it. That's not how that's going to work, and I think that a lot of these people are going to get a very harsh wake-up call at some point. And I think that time is coming, because without the social contract, and mind you, we are losing the social contract day by day, inch by inch. It's going. Without the social contract, law is meaningless. The law is just the social contract on paper, and without the social contract behind it, law is just words. I believe that is a point that I made in the last video. Without the social contract, there will be no civility. Once you stop respecting the rights of other people and expecting them to respect yours, well, especially if you decide to violate theirs and expect them to respect yours, there will be no civility. Eventually that will snap, and it will snap back hard. And then, of course, there's a social contract and empathy. Again, those are intertwined. If you don't have one, you don't have the other. And right now, I would argue that we don't, by and large. That's long, but I hope I've managed to break down the social contract into something that is more digestible, I guess. If I've done that, please leave a like on this and leave a comment. Tell me what I did good, tell me what I did wrong, or things that I could be more clear on. It was a lot of information to try and sum up and break down into bite-sized parts. But I think I did it. So with that, I'm going to go get a drink, because I've been talking for like an hour now. I'm parched. So thank you for listening, and I will see you back here on my next video. It's going to be either on culture or on power. Both are very relevant right now, and it's hard to tell which is which. Either way, I look forward to seeing you. And so until then, take care.